Welcome. I am Deborah Giles, and I am your host of I Too Have a Voice. This podcast is for everyone's voice. When you think of the title of the podcast, it's more about sharing your voice, but it's also about becoming a voice that courageously stands up for justice for all. Today's episode is more of a little bit of conversation and talk about mental illness and not one's mental health. We're not going to dive very deeply, but both mental health and mental illness are equally as important of each other. While mental health refers to the overall emotional or psychological and social well-being of an individual, mental illness refers specifically to a diagnosable condition that affects one's thinking or one's feeling or one's behavior. I recently read an article about a young lady out of Florida who attempted to drown herself and her three children as she was struggling with life, and she thought her children would be better off if they were with God. Fortunately, they all were saved. According to the article, the young lady had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and there had been numerous of interventions through the Baker's Act. And for those who don't know, the Baker's Act is a piece of legislation that was passed in the state of Florida that allows individuals who are experiencing a mental health crisis to be held involuntarily for a period of 72 hours for treatment and examination. And that facility is in a very more restricted facility, but yet it's a temporary detention. This topic is so important to me as I have represented a number of individuals who had mental health diagnosis within the juvenile or the justice system overall. I have witnessed families exhausted trying to get their family members some help. And while psychotropic medication works for some choose to use illegal drugs to help mimic the symptoms, which can often lead to more horrific problems. I read some data from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, some of you know it by SAMHSA, that indicated in 2024 there were about 61.5 million Americans, or 23.4% of our adult population, had a diagnosable mental illness. Although we live in a time where community mental health is being encouraged, there are so many difficulties in keeping persons in their community who have a mental health diagnosis, keeping them in a least restrictive environment, especially when their medication is sometimes not effective or other substances are being incorporated into their medication regimen. There are people you may encounter every day that have a diagnosed mental illness and their symptoms are controlled, but there are so many who are on the opposite end of that spectrum. I read an article where there's a growing effort to help individuals experiencing homelessness re-enter the workforce. While employment opportunities are extremely important and a part of the solution, we must also recognize that many individuals who are experiencing homelessness are faced with significant mental health challenges. As a matter of fact, there was a global meta-analysis done that found about 67% of adults who are experiencing homelessness have a diagnosable mental disorder. Now, this statistic reminds us that homelessness is often more than an issue of unemployment or housing. It's actually a public health issue. If we truly want to help people rebuild their lives, we must address the underlying mental health needs that so often accompany homelessness. Providing job opportunities, while it is important, but lasting success requires access to mental health treatment, supportive services, and stable housing, and sometimes reliable family. Where is our voice in this conversation? This is why I'm here today. Where is our voice? Why are we not making this discussion a priority in our conversations, in our legislation? Johns Hopkins University conducted a study in 2025, and in that study, they found that 1 in 10 adults experienced mental health crisis in the past year, with young adults between the ages of 18 to 29 reporting the highest rates, which was 15.1%, while those over 60 experienced 2.6%. All that tells us is mental illness is reaching every age category. There is so much about mental illness on one's mental health that we need to be aware of, especially with our children and my community, as well as so many other communities around the country. We are witnessing an alarming rise in gun violence, particularly with young people. Now, I'm not suggesting that mental illness is the cause of the violence. However, I believe it's worth asking whether untreated mental health challenges, trauma, or other psychological factors may be contributing to the crisis for some individuals. Years ago, I attended the University of Iowa, and while there, as I did my graduate work, I had the opportunity to conduct some research that profoundly impacted my perspective on this. As part of that research, I visited 8 of the 9 prisons in that correctional facility system. In the state of Iowa, I reviewed about 1,500 files of incarcerated individuals. What stood out the most for me was the significant number of inmates who were there in that system were from the Mississippi Delta. Many had diagnosable mental illness, and their records reflected childhood trauma and adverse life experiences and limited educational opportunities. These factors appear to have played a significant role in the past that ultimately led them into the criminal justice system. That research has become even more meaningful to me today than it was some 20 years ago. In my work, I see firsthand the challenges many parents face with children whose behaviors have become increasingly difficult to manage. While many families are actively seeking help, they encounter so many barriers to receiving those services because their child's struggles are often classified as behavioral rather than mental health related. As a result, many families find themselves being caught in a system that offers few effective solutions. And trust me, the juvenile justice system is not the place to correct. These experiences underscore the need for more meaningful conversations about mental health and mental illness. We must ask ourselves what we can do to change the trajectory that we're on. Families today are facing unprecedented challenges and pressures of violence and poverty and trauma, social isolation and unemployment and economic uncertainty. And all those continue to weigh heavily, not only on the parents, but on the children. We've got to consider how these realities affect emotional well-being and contribute to anxiety and depression and so many other mental health concerns. As we work to give a voice and solve some of society's most pressing challenges, we cannot afford to separate mental illness or mental health from the conversation. Whether we're discussing crime or homelessness or education or parenting or the lack thereof or the well-being of our children or addressing mental health challenges must be a significant part of those conversations. Although society has set aside the month of May to bring awareness to mental health, to me, every month should be conversations and voices and dialogue to this everyday problem. Mental health and mental illness are topics that deserve very thoughtful, very meaningful, very honest, and ongoing dialogue. And what I've shared with you, trust me, I've not even scratched the surface. However, I truly look forward to exploring, going deeper into these issues because it's truly affecting our community. I want to hear from the experts. I want to hear from community members. And I know you do. When are we going to work to make a difference? Because those with mental health issues or mental illness are suffering profoundly. We've got to start with some meaningful solutions. And those solutions need not only help those individuals who are suffering from the disease, but also to strengthen the families and the communities as a whole. It's quite exhausting to have ongoing problems and no solutions. What are the solutions? Until next time, I am Deborah Giles, and I too have a voice.
I too have a voice. I too have a voice. Let it rise.